Bitcoin is every macro trader's favorite asset because they can trade it 24/7, 365. They can trade it anywhere in the world. They can trade it with any amount of leverage, and they can cross-collateralize it with any other asset. And they can talk about it with legal impunity because it's a commodity. It's not a security. And so that makes it the most attractive of all assets to trade on a trend. If you think there's a missile attack coming, you want to sell it. If you think the missile attack was overblown and there's not going to be a war, you want to buy it. I think when people are panicking, they tend to want to do a leverage short on Bitcoin. When interest rates and when the perception is we're going to a risk-on environment or a looser money environment, they'll turn the other way. So I do think that interest rates coming in or the expectation of interest rates coming in is very bullish for the asset. And there'll be certain points where you'll probably see it rip up because of that. I think that this is a pro-business, deregulation, low regulation, pro-business, low tax, pro-innovation administration, in general and everything they're doing. All of those things will be good for Bitcoin over time. I think deregulation is very good, and I think low interest rates are very good.
Just a quick follow-up to that. There was a counter-argument I've heard from other crypto investors that a pro-business administration is actually bearish for Bitcoin short-term because the central bank does not need to ease as much. Perhaps the recession could be stalled by pro-business policies, and liquidity flows would not have a positive impact on Bitcoin because of that. How do you respond to that?
I think there's a lot of double reverse logic that takes place in the macro trading environment.
Yeah.
Like, for example, if you knew there was lots of inflation over the long term, the number one thing to hold is Bitcoin. But when people print a big inflation number, Bitcoin will trade down in the short term. But the double reverse logic is inflation is high, therefore the interest rates are going up, therefore money is getting slurped out, therefore I should find something to sell, so I'll sell Bitcoin. And that's why I would say there are basically two ways to think about Bitcoin. Actually, there's three views. There's the trader, there's the investor, and there's the maximalist. Okay, the trader says it's an asset, I can get a handle on it, I can 50x lever it long and short. They're obsessing over whether or not good news is coming because good news is bad news and bad news is good news, right? And then they want to make sure they're the first one to get the bad news so they can treat it as good news so they can get out of the trade before the bad news manifests or something like that. Yeah. And if you're one of those traders, you know who you are and more power to you. I'm not that guy. Then the investor view is, this is the dominant digital monetary network in the world. It's going to go up by a factor of 10 to 100. And I'm just going to hold it like Apple, like Facebook, like Google, like Microsoft. I'm going to hold it like my big tech monopoly for the next decade. And it's going to jerk around a bit. And I'm going to buy it on dips. The maximalist view is, this is property rights for 8 billion people. This is the greatest opportunity of the 21st century. This is economic empowerment for every business, every country, every family, every individual, right? I'm going to support it at all times, every way I can, forever.
You went to the crypto summit and you made an orange tie joke.
So I don't wear my orange tie.
Any other takeaways?
Well, I thought the fact that we were at the White House was the first takeaway because a year previous, the White House and the entire administration was somewhere between at war with the industry and unsupportive. So the fact that the President of the United States would host everybody in the entire industry at the White House was an extraordinary milestone. It hasn't happened, when's the last time a new industry was fated by the White House in the last 50 years? The second is the president signed the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve the day before. And that was also unexpected. The third thing that was unexpected is the evening after that summit, the Secretary of the Treasury arranged for the OCC to give guidance reversing the anti-Bitcoin, anti-crypto guidelines that had been hampering the banking industry. We didn't, we've been hoping for that, but the fact that it came so quickly was very auspicious. And then that night, David Sachs, the crypto czar, went on to a podcast and volunteered that the United States government views Bitcoin as immaculately conceived, the only truly decentralized crypto network, or the only commodity, asset without an issuer. They saw it as a sound store of value. They view it as digital gold. They don't intend to sell any, and they're going to look for ways to acquire more. And I thought that was relevant because for 4 years, the previous administration had no utterances on this except through the legal filings of Gary Gensler. And Gensler, in a very subtle, backhanded way, suggested that he would grudgingly allow Bitcoin to exist and nothing else. And so he kind of said, well, it's a commodity, but he had lots of reservations, and he slowed down the institutional adoption of Bitcoin as much as one could reasonably slow it down. Whereas what you saw on Friday night at that crypto summit was the administration embracing the industry and suggesting that they were going to aggressively put pro-crypto, pro-Bitcoin regs in place, embracing this thing as not only is it a digital commodity, but it's maybe a better digital commodity than gold, right? The White House didn't declare that they're going to accelerate their gold acquisitions one way or the other. So I thought it was a major inflection point for the industry in terms of the legitimization of both the industry, but Bitcoin was legitimized on that day, or in that 24-hour period, from the point that the president signed the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve to the point that David Sachs said, this is the digital commodity recognized by the United States government. That was a pretty important day in the life of the entire industry.
I think last year you were talking about banks being allowed to hold Bitcoin. That would be a huge step forward. Now, after the OCC announcement, what do you think is going to happen this year?
Well, I did have a chance to speak with the Secretary of Treasury at the White House, and he shared with all of us that he wanted to make sure that the banking system was able to embrace digital assets and handle digital assets. And they have a program of progressively, thoughtfully rolling back anti-Bitcoin rules. And of course, that requires guidance from many different federal agencies, the OCC, the FDIC, the Treasury. Also, the Federal Reserve has some influence on this. They were pretty definitive that they were going to find every anti-crypto rule, all the anti-Bitcoin guidance and rules, and they were going to reverse them explicitly as soon as they could in a programmatic fashion, almost like week by week stepping through that. So I thought that was profound. The other insight, Bonnie, that comes from that summit is that the Secretary of Treasury shows up and was so very, very engaged. And you also saw the Secretary of Commerce very engaged. And you also saw Kelly Loeffler, the Secretary of Small Business Administration, very engaged. So you had 3 cabinet members extremely engaged, in addition to David Sachs, the crypto czar. And maybe the most powerful financial regulator in the world, certainly in the U.S. government, but maybe in the world, is the Secretary of Treasury of the United States, so Scott Bessent. And Scott Bessent had been viewed to be progressive and innovative when he was nominated for the role, but he hadn't said very much on the topic of digital assets leading up to that summit. And so Bessent showed himself to be very well versed, very progressive, very thoughtful, and deliberate, and supportive. You know, and I think that that exceeds everybody's expectations. We knew David Sachs would be supportive, and we knew the president was supportive, but you could imagine an administration where you have one or two members of the cabinet that are supportive, but other members of the cabinet that are simply moderate, and they want to move forward in a deliberate, thoughtful, careful fashion, and they would slow things down. But what I saw at the White House was I saw that everybody is supportive, everybody is deliberate. This administration is moving faster with innovative programs and decisive, courageous, pro-business, pro-technology, pro-innovation programs. It's moving faster than any administration in my lifetime. You have to go all the way back to Thatcher and Reagan in the 80s to see such pro-innovation, pro-business, pro-freedom type actors. But even they, I don't think, moved nearly as quickly and decisively, and they didn't have so many intricate topics. So I really think this is like a once in 50 years, could be once in 100-year type event. And Bessent's actions and his words, both before and if you look at the interviews that he's given after this summit, they're very clear. He went on the Laura Trump show last Saturday night. It was a show that I was on, he was on, David Sachs was on. But he stood there on camera in front of the White House and he said, we're going to make the United States, you know, the digital asset leader in the world. Digital assets are here to stay. And that's the Secretary of the Treasury. And if you think about every utterance from previous secretaries of the Treasury on this topic, right, that's 100 times more powerful than anyone in a like position has ever contemplated or uttered in the history of this industry.